What a beautiful parking lot. Your cars look great, and so do you. 4 years ago, Trump won the state by 44,000 votes. We're not going to make that mistake again. We're going to win here in Pennsylvania. We're going to win in Michigan. We're going to win in Wisconsin. And we are going to get rid of the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. And we're going to elect Joe and Kamala. I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for being here and for the great work that he has done. And I want to thank Summer Lee and Sarah Enamorado and Brian Petrick and Stephanie Fellow for their great work as trade unionists. And one of the goals that Joe Biden and I have is that we know that workers do well and the middle class does well when we grow the trade union movement in America. There are millions of workers who want to join unions today, but are unable to do so because of illegal corporate activity. We're going to put an end to that. Now, you have heard it before, and I'm going to say it again. This is the most important election, not only in our lifetimes, but in the modern history of our country. Simply stated, this country, and in fact the world, cannot tolerate 4 more years of Donald Trump. And not only do we have to elect Joe as our next president, we need to get rid of Mitch McConnell. And we need a Democratic Senate that will pass immediately an opiate crisis legislation that will protect the working families of this country. It is an outrage beyond belief that McConnell and his friends are refusing to vote an extra nickel for workers who are struggling to put food on the table, to avoid eviction, to pay for health care. And here is my promise to you, if I have anything to say about it, and I will. First order of business for a Democratic Senate is a major opioid stimulus package to protect working people. And let me say to all Pennsylvanians, not just progressives, but moderates and conservatives, I hope you all believe and understand that America cannot be a model for the world if we continue to have a president who is a pathological liar. You know, in a democracy, people disagree with each other. We'll have disagreements. But you cannot have stability in government if you have a president that has lied some 20,000 times since he is president. And we do not need a president who does not believe in our Constitution, who does not believe in the rule of law, and in fact is trying desperately to undermine American democracy. We don't need a president who is trying to suppress the vote. A president who is questioning the very legitimacy of the election in which he is competing. and has refused to say that he will leave office after he loses. So to all of those who have put their lives on the line to defend American democracy, I say that we cannot sustain another 4 years of Donald Trump. And we do not need a president who is a racist, who is a sexist, who is a homophobe, who is a xenophobe, and who is a religious bigot. We do not need a president who every single day, for cheap political reasons, is trying to divide us up. We need a president, and that president will be Joe Biden, who is bringing us together, not dividing us up. And so at this moment, this pivotal moment in American history, we have got to come together as blacks and whites and Latinos, Native Americans, Asian Americans, gay and straight, those of us born in America, those of us who emigrated to America. We have got together and come together as one people to show our strength and to evict Donald Trump from the White House. And most certainly, we cannot continue to have a president who rejects science. Not now. Not as we face the worst pandemic in 100 years, which has already taken the lives of some 220,000 Americans. Just the other day, as you'll recall, Donald Trump told us in the debate with Joe, he told us, and I quote, "We're rounding the corner on this pandemic. The things are getting better." And just yesterday, it was reported that we have reached the highest level of recorded COVID-19 cases in a single day. Over 80,000 people, new cases, and over 2,200 here in Pennsylvania. But it's not just that Trump lies about the severity of the pandemic. What is even worse is that his anti-science attitude is directly responsible for the United States having the highest per capita death rate from COVID of any major country on earth. The truth is, sad truth is, tens of thousands of Americans have died who should not have died if Trump and the administration were prepared to deal with this pandemic. From day one, as you'll all recall, Trump downplayed the seriousness of this horrific disease. You'll all remember him saying, "Don't worry about it, it's going to go away." Well, Mr. Trump, it hasn't gone away. It has gotten worse. And you can't effectively combat this pandemic by ignoring what the scientists and the doctors are saying. You can't combat this pandemic by calling Dr. Fauci, who is a dedicated public servant, an idiot. You don't combat this pandemic by making fun of people who wear masks. You don't combat this pandemic by continuing to hold rallies where there is no social distancing, and where people do not wear face masks. That is not the model, that's not the example we want to be showing to the American people. In fact, think about it. How absurd is it that the White House itself has become a super spreader of this virus? With many of the people working there, including the president, coming down with COVID. You don't combat this pandemic when 6 months after the start of this horrific situation, 6 months later, we have doctors and nurses and people working in critical jobs who still do not have the personal protective equipment that they need. This is a country that put a man on the moon. This is a country that develops sophisticated guided missiles. You would think, you might think, that we'd be able to produce the masks that our doctors need. And now I just want to take a moment and ask you some questions of enormous consequences. And I want you to think for a bit about your answers. Which candidate for president has shown that he will be disciplined, that he will be responsible, that he will do his best to protect the people around him as we deal with this pandemic? And the answer is, well, the answer is Joe Biden. And which candidate for president has made it clear that he will develop policies which are based on science, not right-wing politics, and that he will seek the advice of the best scientists and the best doctors in our country and around the world to combat and defeat this pandemic? And the answer is, it is Joe Biden. Which candidate for president will develop strong national protocols and guidelines and model the behaviors we all need to engage in to keep our families, our co-workers, and our neighbors safe? And the answer is Joe Biden. Now, here is a really hard one. You ready for a hard question? Which candidate has the temperament? Which candidate has the temperament to see us through this unprecedented moment, which is, in fact, the worst public health crisis in 100 years? Which candidate has the temperament? And I think the answer to that one is not very difficult. In the White House today, you have somebody who lies, somebody who is irresponsible, somebody who has turned his back on science. And the answer as to who has the temperament is quite clear. And that answer is Joe Biden. But brothers and sisters, as all of you know, and as you have heard already this afternoon from the speakers who have gone before me, the crisis that we're facing today is not just the pandemic, as serious as that is. It is also a major economic crisis, the most severe economic downturn that we have seen since the Great Depression. And let me be very, very blunt. The working class of our country today is in more desperation right now than at any time since the 1930s. As we speak, tens of millions of our fellow countrymen have lost their jobs as a result of the pandemic. They have lost their incomes. They have lost their health insurance. They have depleted their life savings. They cannot afford to pay their rent or pay their mortgages. They cannot, by the millions, afford to put food on the table for their children. And my Republican friends in Congress can spin it any way they want. But the truth is that that is the reality facing America today. Today, the percentage of Americans who do not have jobs is at its highest level in 45 years, while, as you have heard, tens of millions of Americans who do have jobs are working at starvation wages. And as bad as the economy has been in general, it has been far, far worse for our African American and Latino brothers and sisters. Unbelievably, during this pandemic, nearly 60% of Latino families and 55% of African American families have either experienced a job loss or a pay cut. Meanwhile, and we don't talk about this all that often, not everyone in America is hurting today. While the middle class is being devastated and poverty is growing, we are witnessing a massive increase in income and wealth inequality. And I want you to hear this, because you're not going to hear it too much on the TV. But over the past 7 months, 644 billionaires, not a lot of people, 644 billionaires have seen their wealth go up by $931 billion. So here we are in the midst of a major economic crisis. 30 million Americans have lost their jobs. 12 million Americans have lost their health insurance. 29 million Americans do not have enough food to eat. 40 million Americans face eviction, and yet 644 billionaires have seen an increase in their wealth by $937 billion. We need an economy that works for all of us, not just the few. And one of the issues that we have got to have the courage to tackle is this obscene level of income and wealth inequality in America. Together, we are going to end the greed of the billionaire class. When we got 500,000 people who are homeless today, when we got 90 million people who are uninsured or underinsured, we are going to tell the billionaire class they cannot have it all. This country belongs to all of us and not just the few. And what Joe Biden and I believe is that we must create an economy and a government that works for all of us and not just wealthy campaign contributors. And I want to say a few words because I think during this campaign there has not been enough discussion about what Joe and Kamala are actually proposing in terms of addressing the economic crises facing this country. And I want to say a few words on that because it is enormously important. Number one, Joe understands that a $7.25 an hour minimum wage is a starvation wage. And Joe understands, as I do, that we have got to raise the national federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. In the richest country on earth, if you work 40 hours a week, you should not be living in poverty. And when we raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour, 40 million Americans will get a well-deserved pay raise. And Joe and I understand something else, is that it is absurd and grossly unfair that women in America continue to earn 70, 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. It is not a radical idea by any means to say that in this country we need equal pay for equal work. And Joe understands, as I mentioned earlier, that if we're going to grow the middle class in this country, we have got to grow the trade union movement in America. And the truth is, all over this country, there are workers who want to join unions, but they're unable to do so because of often illegal activities on the part of their employers. Their employers will fire workers who engaged in union organizing, who are standing up for workers' rights. And Joe and I are going to change that law. If workers want to join a union, and if 50% of the workers in a shop plus one sign a card, you know what? They got a union. And Joe and I understand that we have got to stop providing corporate welfare for companies who are throwing American workers out on the street. You cannot have a situation where corporations shut down plants here in America, they move to low-wage countries abroad, and the next day they're online for a federal handout. Ain't gonna happen. If corporations want federal assistance, they're going to have to treat their workers with respect and dignity. And there's something else that Joe Biden understands, that in the midst of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, we have got to create millions of good-paying union jobs. Brothers and sisters, sometimes we forget about it. Sometimes we forget about it. We're the richest country in the history of the world. How in God's name do we continue to have our roads and our bridges and our tunnels deteriorating? How do we have millions of people all across this country, not just in Flint, Michigan, who cannot drink the water that comes out of their taps? How do we have a transportation system, a rail system, far behind countries throughout the world? How do we have a major affordable housing crisis where 19 million American families unbelievably are spending half of their incomes trying to put a roof over their heads? We can put millions of workers back to work rebuilding America, and that's what we've got to do. And Joe Biden and you and I understand something else, that it is incredibly embarrassing, it is humiliating that the United States of America today, this great country, is the only major country on earth not to guarantee paid medical and family leave. I don't know how many of you know this. We don't talk about it too often. You go to Scandinavia, a woman has a baby. Depending on the country, she may get 7-8 months off full paid leave. And the father will get time off as well. And yet in this country, beyond belief. A woman today, working class woman, lower income woman, has a baby. She may be forced to go back to work next week or in 2 weeks because she needs that job to provide the income for her family. Well, in my view, if a woman has a baby, if a kid gets sick and mom or dad has to stay home, we must have paid family and medical leave. And that is why Joe has proposed at least 12 weeks of paid family and medical leave for working families. I would go further, but that is a start. And brothers and sisters, when we talk about the children, and we don't talk about kids enough in this country, you know that? We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth. And I get a little bit tired of politicians in Washington, many of my colleagues in the Senate, they get up there in front of that American flag and they say, "We love America." Well, if you love America, you love the children of America. And if you love the children of America, you understand that when mom goes to work and when dad goes to work, those children and their parents deserve quality, affordable child care. And we all know that today, our current child care system is totally inadequate. Our children and their parents deserve better. And that is why Joe is supporting universal child care for all 3- and 4-year-olds in this country. And when we talk about our children and we talk about our young people, we are talking about the future of America. It is not too much to demand that we have the best educated workforce in the world. From child care through graduate school. It is not too much to say that every kid in this country who has the ability and the desire should be able to get a higher education regardless of his or her income. That is not a radical demand. And that is why Joe believes that we should make public colleges and universities and trade schools tuition-free for all working-class families in this country. And I have talked to so many young people and middle-aged people throughout this country who are talking about what this horrific and oppressive student debt has done to their lives. People are not getting married, they can't buy a home, they can't have kids because of that student debt. And that is why Joe will make a substantial improvement in where we are today and cancel student debt for millions of young Americans. And when we talk about justice and when we talk about equality, Joe Biden understands that we must demand that the wealthiest people in this country, including billionaires like Donald Trump, start paying their fair share of taxes. It is beyond absurd that we have major corporations that make billions of dollars in profit each year that do not pay a nickel in federal income taxes. It is totally grotesque that working class people pay a higher effective tax rates than the wealthiest people in this country. So what Joe Biden understands and what you understand is the time is long overdue for the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes. Joe Biden understands that it is a little bit crazy that the United States of America is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a human right. Now, I happen to live in Burlington, Vermont, which is 50 miles away from the Canadian border. In Canada, every person can go to any doctor they want, go to any hospital you want. You're in the hospital for 2 months, serious procedure, and your bill is zero. Bill is zero. There's no such thing as medical bankruptcy in Canada because their healthcare system is publicly funded. And Canada is not unique. All over the world, democratic, industrialized countries have recognized that healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. And while Joe and I disagree on the path forward to universal health care, I believe in a Medicare for all single-payer program. Joe's health care program will expand health care to tens and tens of millions of Americans who don't have it, and will lower the outrageously high cost of health care in America. And I'll tell you what else Joe understands. He understands that it is so very wrong that in America we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. During my campaign for the presidency, I went over to Canada with a number of people who were diabetic, who utilized insulin. And we went 15 miles away from Detroit into Ontario, Canada. We were able to buy the same insulin product made by the same company for 1/10 of the price that it is sold here in the United States. And in my view, the time is long overdue to take on the greed, the corruption, and the price fixing of the pharmaceutical industry. And we must not and will not continue to pay prices for prescription drugs that are higher than any other country on earth. So, brothers and sisters, here we are in a moment in history in which we face multiple crises. We have a pandemic, we have a severe economic downturn, we are facing the existential threat of climate change, we're dealing with systemic racism and a broken criminal justice system, we're dealing with an extremely unfair immigration system, we're dealing with massive levels of income and wealth inequality, a corrupt political system in which billionaires buy elections. And at the White House right now, we have the most corrupt president in the modern history of this country, concerned about his own wealth and his own power, and someone who has turned his back on the needs of ordinary Americans. So what we have to do in 11 days is evict Donald Trump. We have to elect Joe Biden. And the day after Joe becomes president, we have got to mobilize tens of millions of workers to stand up for economic justice, to stand up for social justice, to stand up for racial justice, to stand up for environmental justice, and to tell the ruling class that their day has come and gone, that we want a government that's going to work for all of us, not just a few. So let us go forward. Let us elect Joe. and let us begin the process of transforming this country and creating the nation we know we can become. Thank you all very much.